Hello, everyone. My name is Austin Belzer from Austin B Media. I'm here today with Irad Straus and Mike Mintz. They're the co-directors of the documentary Bowery. It's a it's a documentary about the Bowery. In fact, it's about and correct me if I'm wrong, the homeless population of the Bowery. So, Mike, Irad, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate taking the time before Tribeca, which I know is always a busy time, to come and talk with me. It's fantastic.
Happy
Um,
Yeah, thank you for your interest in the film, and we're really excited to discuss it with you.
yeah, I actually have a bent towards this film in a positive way. I promise. So I actually helped out I did a missions trip in Colorado where we were visiting homeless shelters. And then I also was volunteering in Kansas City at one of the homeless shelters. So I am very, very familiar with the topic. And let me know if you want me to use the term houseless, because I know that's becoming a more popular term
Yeah.
um,
There's different
to
terms. I
describe.
mean, homeless is definitely, I guess, still the most widely used, but unhoused and houseless are becoming more popular as well. But whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, we don't have any sort of agenda on that front. You can use whichever term you feel most comfortable with.
Oh, okay. The reason I ask is that that's what they told us to say in Colorado. So it was kind of an interesting thing where I had gone in saying like we were saying homeless, and then the person pulled everyone aside in the meeting and was like, "Hey, houseless is the name of the game." But yeah, so and I actually had um, I talked to a homeless person in my area just this weekend on Saturday, so I am very familiar with this. So, m- so how did you find these subjects? Did you go around the Bowery just saying, "Hey, would you like to be on camera for this documentary we're making?"
Something similar to that, yeah. So just to kind of give the preamble to the film, it was a very impromptu process, and Mike and I were friends long before we decided to collaborate on this project. Mike is a filmographer by trade and profession. I come from a very different world. I'm a tech entrepreneur, honestly, and I ran my first business, and I moved to New York City with the business. And after several years, the business failed, and I was feeling very sorry for myself, and started going on long walks to the city, and started talking to homeless people, which is something I'd done before, but never in such a concentrated manner, I suppose. And I started to have really interesting conversations and get exposed to new perspectives that I found really inspiring. And I approached Mike about potentially, coming and exploring this world on film, and he graciously accepted, and we kind of took it from there. And I lived near the Bowery prior to the process of making the film, and I was familiar with some of the subjects of the film, in particular Dollar, who kind of acts as the Greek chorus for the film. He's the one who kind of introduces us to the world, and we kind of see it through his lens initially and start to kind of branch out from there. But he was the first subject we worked with, again, given our relationship prior to starting the film. And then the network kind of grew from there. So through Dollar, we met another character, Rubia, and through that, we met some other characters. And what's special, I think, about the film also is it's not just about a random group of people on the Bowery. It's about a group of interconnected people who all know each other, all have relationships. And the film does center on a few specific dyads, a few specific relationships, but again, everyone is interconnected. And there's a few key scenes in the film also where we see the overlap, which again, I think helps bring everything together, and make it feel like a more kind of solid ensemble piece, as opposed to just disparate people who are all going through the same thing, but there isn't really some sort of a narrative thread.
And just to to focus a little more on that, it's not like we cast a wide net and went down there and be like, hey, do you want to be filmed? Do you want to be filmed? It really did all start with Dollar. Erod had a multitude of interactions with him, and he was always our goal was to get his story. And like Irad said, he's the one who introduced us to people who introduced us to people. It got to a point, months down the line where we would just happen to be in the area and we would know about 80% of the homeless people by name. But that was a very organic process. It took time and, introductions, but a lot of that was not us saying like, can you introduce us to these people? It was them bringing us over and be like, hey, it was again a very organic process and something took time to get there.
Yeah, I think the last thing to mention on that front is ultimately we decided to center the film on a year in the life that started in June and ended in June. But we'd started filming 3 months prior to that. And the initial footage, I mean, it didn't make the light of day. It's not in the film, but that was basically us kind of getting a feel for the landscape and getting comfortable with the subjects, having them get comfortable with us. It was kind of the exploratory phase. Also, there were people who didn't end up making it into the movie at all, who initially thought might, or so there was definitely a 2-3 month period where we kind of started to test the waters and introduce ourselves. And it took a while to establish the relationships. And so when the film actually starts and the viewer is getting introduced to these subjects for the first time, this is already after months of us having worked with them. So there is already a warmth and a familiarity, which I think translates because they really do open up and give us a lot, and you're kind of thrown into their world without any sort of barriers whatsoever. And that's only because, again, we had established this relationship prior. And you don't really get the preamble to that in the film, but there was a lot of work that went in even before you start seeing actual footage.
It also gave us time to hone the aesthetic as well.
Yeah.
But that we can get into that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is an important thing to build those relationships, because for those who haven't talked to a homeless person, it's a very scary experience when somebody comes up to you. Because just to give an example of something I learned about this weekend, there's a lot of violence. Say, like, if you ever go behind a Walmart, don't, because the person I talked to this weekend was saying, yeah, somebody got killed there just because they were bothering somebody else. And it's this, you have to build that trust of saying, hey, I am a safe person to talk to. I don't, want to bother you. I just want to talk,
For sure.
Violence definitely plays a role in the film. I mean, there's a murder that happens, and there's other violence that is, naturally in places where there's not, in communities where there's not a lot of resources, it's kind of, there's an element of a dog eat dog.
Yeah.
And just, a lot of listlessness and desperation.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's astounding how often that happens, really. Because at the end of the day, what I've learned is sometimes it's just better to kind of just say, hey, I'm just talking. And because what I've learned this weekend, at the very least, was they don't want to be bothered because they're always getting bothered. Whether, at least in the city, down where I live, it's a lot less. But people kind of leave them alone, and in relative peace if you can find a safe place. But
So that's
so
actually it's an interesting dichotomy also that you're touching on, because it really is twofold. Like on a societal level, I think a lot of times these people are made to feel invisible. And so you're kind of
Yeah.
standing there in broad daylight and people are passing you as if you don't exist. And that to me is a very dejecting and awful thing to experience. But then on the other side, again, you are a target and you're constantly vulnerable. And so the two sides to that existence, where one, you are completely at the mercy of anyone who wants to come and attack you. And on the other hand, you're also completely invisible. Like that's a very strange position to be in.
And just to add on top of that, like, we're not experts on homelessness, even after all these experiences. But just to say that, just like anybody else, the homeless population is not a monolith. These quote unquote rules of engagement, will be different from person to person because people have different lives and personalities and
biases and
yeah.
experiences.
So I think everyone's different, and that's something that is going to play a role in how they interact with, passersby.
Yeah, for sure. Because uh, me and the same person, were having a discussion we about how those biases play a role. Because um, anytime you go out to a public place, you'll see people with signs, right? And we just kind of talked about like, and this would have been something I never would have thought to ask maybe like 2 years ago. I was like, hey, are those people like real? And he's just like, well, some of them are, some of them aren't. One of them went out in a Cadillac, and the other is actually real. So it's an interesting dichotomy where it kind of creates these biases, where we see those signs and automatically those brain cells switch to, oh, I should be dubious, or should I hear them out, but getting back to the docu-short, um, so um, so what do you want for people who are at Tribeca or virtually or at home? Um, what would you like them to either learn or experience from this documentary?
We could both say something different.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, the goal, I don't know what the solution is to homelessness. Again, as Mike mentioned, neither he nor I are public health experts whatsoever, but we're both concerned citizens who see this problem getting worse, and it's untenable on all sides, societally, and also for the people who are suffering homelessness. Like, this has to end, and it has to be dealt with empathetically. So my goal with the film was, or my experience, again, it comes back to this concept of invisibility, which again to me is just such a, I can't even imagine, again, living out in the streets and feeling that vulnerability, but that invisibility. And we want an empathetic solution to take effect. So the goal of this movie was to try and center on 6 or 7 different characters who all have big personalities and are all going through things in their lives. And the hope is that at least one character in the film will resonate with any viewer and every viewer. And the goal is that whoever watches the film should come away from the experience loving a homeless person, having felt some sort of a deep connection with at least one of the characters. And I think if we're successful in that fact, if everyone who watches the movie can come away with some sort of a personal relationship in their own mind with one of the characters, hopefully, again, that can help catalyze some sort of positive change. Again, rooted in empathy and understanding, but also trying to deal with this problem, because the longer it goes on, the worse it gets. And again, we're not serving these people who are living in these encampments. We're not serving society at large. Something needs to give. But again, it needs to be done with an understanding that these are people. They have aspirations and goals and relationships, just like everybody else. But something needs to be done. And again, from a place of love and empathy.
Yeah. And along those lines, we chose very specifically to center the film on these people's lives, as opposed to on us as filmmakers or, policymakers or anything like that. It really is. It's all about them walking and seeing things through their perspective. And through that, I think ultimately, if people walk away with a fulfilling experience and a good cinematic experience, one that, stays with them, I do think that if there is any solution to homelessness, it is going to be a bottom-up solution. It's not going to be, top-down solutions haven't worked. And what it would take, I think, is people to, like Irad said, to shift a perspective, to begin to humanize and see them as people who've gotten the short end of the stick, as opposed to, just a nuisance, and just break them down with simple bullet points of what their profile is, whether it's addiction, mental illness. I think to trigger that switch in the brain is really important. We've actually had friends and family who watched earlier cuts of the film and did tell us that after having watched, they did have a different perspective on the homeless people in their communities. And we're talking people all around the world, but especially in this country. And that was a real boon for us, and a real encouragement that art, in this case, I think our film can have an impact, and it's going to be small, but you replicate that a bunch of times. I think we've seen that art can have an impact on society, and this is our best go at it.
Yeah, there's also the mantra like, why don't you get a job? A lot of people, I think, and I probably said this in the past too. When I was less exposed to it, you kind of think to yourself, well, why don't you just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get a job? And I think that again is a failure to understand the backgrounds. And again, as Mike said earlier, almost this is not a monolith, and people come to this experience from a lot of different backgrounds and experiences, but there are certain common threads that tend to run through the community. And a lot of them is early childhood trauma. A lot of them lost parents, or parents who were drug addicts, or parents who were in prison, or grew up in foster care. And so these people, many of them are just not equipped with the tools to thrive in society like the rest of us. And so some of the characters we see go through this in the film as well. They want to get jobs. They want to move past this kind of point in their lives that they're stuck in, but they really don't know how, and they just kind of find themselves in these very kind of these harmful kind of loops and these
Vicious cycles.
these vicious cycles. Thank you. Of again addiction and it's a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult to just get off your ass and go get a job.
Same with going to the shelter, along those same lines. There's people who, shelters are not necessarily safe environments for people. They feel many people that we interacted with really felt more comfortable even with the vulnerability of living on the street than they did in shelters, because it can be a very, very tenuous and dangerous situation for some people.
Yeah, I've actually had that experience as well, where I used to ride the bus all the time in Kansas City, and I'd come across homeless people, and they'd say, "No, no, no, I don't want to go to a shelter, because my stuff got stolen, or just various things." We also talked about the topic of violence, which is a very prevalent issue. Uh, but yeah, that makes me think. Every time I think about how to fix it, I think of a story of I have of Kansas City. So there was this old government building. It's been abandoned. It had been abandoned probably decades at this point. It's probably a government building from the 1990s. Just how by the way it looked, it was all glass, everything. And below that building, there was like a little overpass, where there was a homeless camp, and the city came in and said, all right, we're blocking off access to this because some construction firm wants it as their new building, even though they had a building like 2 blocks away at that point. They just wanted it on Main Street because that's how you do business in the city. But I just think if we can avoid situations like that as a country, as in our bigger cities, or even smaller cities, there's tons of abandoned buildings. I mean, you go anywhere in a city or a town, you'll find an abandoned building. And I think this might not be the solution, but if there was some way that those buildings could be bought up and repurposed, that could be a very useful thing for maybe as a makeshift shelter or something like that. Again, I'm not an expert, but
I think
I do think
neither are we, and I think that there is no silver bullet solution
no.
that would be helpful, but there are a lot of cases where people are offered housing, and they prefer to stay where they are, just out of routine and comfortability.
There's other factors too. There's and we heard this a lot from the subject we worked with both on and off camera, that you're not allowed to use substances when you're in these shelters, and so
Right.
A lot of times people would rather sleep on the street and be able to get high at 2:00 in the morning than go into a shelter and have a warm shower but not be able to get high at 2:00 in the morning.
And with regards to addiction, that's something that I think we saw very clearly, is that particularly with opiate addictions. It's not like they're recreationally getting high. Their desire for heroin is really just about getting to baseline. It's not about, because of the withdrawal, it's not fun. It's just they need it to get through the day, to get to a normal place. And so no wonder people are more willing to be on the street and feed the addiction that literally keeps them conscious than go into a shelter and potentially have extreme withdrawal.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that a ton. But yeah, I don't think there's, like you say, any one just silver bullet, to use your own words, because I think, man, it's just such a systemic problem. Like, how can I go to two different states and run into actually no, three different states, because I live in Arkansas now, and still encounter these problems? It's very clear that this is.
And it's not normal. If you go to other Western countries, you travel across Europe, you don't see the same thing. And so it is, something is wrong here. I mean, and there's homelessness in India. I mean, there's homelessness in many other countries in the world. But when you're looking at like the Western world, it's pretty inexcusable.
Yeah.
So again, neither Mike, and just to reiterate what we said before, I mean, neither Mike nor I pretend to have the answers, but the problem is clearly getting worse. And if we don't, as a society, look in the mirror and say this has to stop, we can't. This, because again, it's not tenable for the people living in that homeless lifestyle. It's dangerous. People die a lot. It's not tenable for them, and for society at large also. It's not tenable to be walking through 10 cities and have needles on the ground and human feces in the streets. It's just really a societal ill that needs to be resolved. And immediately.
It's reflective also of just the general state of the country, where the amount of bending over backwards it takes to try and even repair just roads and bridges in this country. No wonder why would they put any money into solving this problem, or resources and time and effort. I think there's a certain prioritorial issue here as well.
And it's a confluence of a lot of problems. Again, as we said earlier, also it's just to say homelessness does not fully encapsulate the problem. It's a mental health epidemic. It's a drug epidemic.
It's a housing
crisis. So it's a confluence of many different factors that, when they all combine, it creates this monster that, again, is just popping up in every major city across the country. And it's just spiraling out of control, and something needs to be done.
Yeah, and I think that's that's probably the best anyone can say it, because I've run into so many situations. Like, I was back in Kansas City, I was trying to get restaurants to donate leftovers to the shelters, and they're just like, no, we can't do it because we have to have these permits, and it's just a bad situation on that era, because I've read story after story about police cracking down on donations. It's ridiculous. But Mike Irad, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. I really have enjoyed this chat so much. It's something very near and dear to my heart, because I think this crisis, however you want to phrase it, is inexcusable in every sense of the word. And I hope that your film helps shed some more light on that. I mean, I just hope that is my hope of this film, that it gets the word out there.
We appreciate that. We hope so too. And one last thing to say on our end is, we also, our goal first and foremost was to make a good movie. So I'm going to say, I hope that you enjoy watching the film, which again sounds like a weird thing to say when we talk about a film about such a heavy subject. But in our minds, as filmmakers and as artists, first and foremost, in order for this to be able to captivate an audience, it has to be a good film. So we really sought out to create what would watch and play out as a really strong indie drama. I hope that resonates with you and with the audience.
And just to put it into perspective, we filmed 150 hours of footage, and what comes down is just over an hour and a half of very deliberate decisions. And we really hope, like Irad said, that people are captivated by this, and that experience with the film drives them to whatever conclusions they'll take, but hopefully one where they are more easily able to humanize these people who desperately need it.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to put it, because I think 150 hours versus what I think I saw hour 40. It's just a small look. If you want to get a real picture for how homelessness works, I encourage everyone listening to this to go out to a bus stop if you have bus stops near you, and just talk to anyone. Just talk and connect.
Yeah,
at the very least.
People, as someone, you don't necessarily have to give money, but just to acknowledge their existence, to give a smile, to say good morning to someone as you walk by. Like, these things seem so insignificant and small, but just remember, we're all people, we're all in this together.
They had childhoods, they have hopes and dreams.
Yeah.
They have dreams when they sleep.
Yeah. Well, I will have a link in the description for how you can watch this documentary. But Mike Irad, thank you so much for joining me.
Cheers,
Thanks so much,
Austin. For your time.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
All right, bye guys.
Bye.